Thanks, Karen. Got it. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our session on building children's resilience through literature. This is something I've been working on, for a couple of decades, actually, in different capacities. And this is a three-part series. So this is part one. We'll have the next two coming up soon. My name is Alan Rosales. Currently, I am the director of professional learning and development for the Kill Robertson Center. I teach at Roosevelt University and also at Oakton College. I'm an author. I've written a couple books for teachers and a storybook series for kiddos that you'll be able to see today and in the following sessions. And I love to provide tons of strategies for teachers to implement in the classroom. And a lot of those you should have received. You have some handouts in front of you. I always say that those are some gold nuggets there. Those are freebies, and they're really helpful. I'll go over those today and in the upcoming sessions to help you choose from great books and to develop critical thinkers in your classrooms through great inquiry-based learning and so forth. I know that the topic of resilience is really important, especially through the climate that we're going through right now. I know everybody's at a different place, different emotions and feelings are happening. So it's good when we have some strategies to help develop children's and our own resilience through the things that we go in life. Sorry, there's so many. I can mute. There are going to be a lot of opportunities for us to engage. So I do encourage you to be live if possible. It's always great to see your faces, to get to know you. But the more we interact with each other, the more the community learns and thrives together, because we do learn from each other's experiences. So please, please, please make sure to speak up, share your perspectives, ask any questions, okay? And with that, let's get started. So for today, we're going to identify some components of resilience. I'm going to describe the storytizing process, which is this method I created years ago for my teachers. And it's good to be able to take children through the critical thinking process. And then we're going to learn how to engage children in inquiry-based learning through some strategies that I created. So before we get started with that, in the chat, and I'd love to take a couple volunteers, just to think about a storybook that you recently read to a child, or if it's your favorite of all time, that demonstrated resilience, that the character had that resilience, and then provide a one-word feeling or emotion that it produces in you. So think about a storybook. What's the storybook? How did the character show resilience? And what's one feeling or emotion that it produces in you? Let's take about 10, 20 seconds there. And if you're ready, just jump in, just unmute, just share your name, and then share your perspective there.
Hi, my name is Anjanette Wordlaw. I'm a pre-K teacher in District 148. When I think of Pete the Cat and my 4 groovy buttons, how he kept losing a button. And the biggest thing I teach my class is, did he cry? Oh no, buttons come, buttons go. So anytime, and then I remind them, well, what do you still have? And they say their belly button. So anytime they break down, and we refer back to Pete the Cat, saying, well, someone took the toy, but you still got your belly button. Kind of making fun of it, but it teaches them strength, like to be strong. And to me, that's That's what I use.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Would you mind adding your name? If not, we can add your name the, to your square there. So I love to address you by your name. That's okay. Somebody else, you can jump in or write on the chat. Let me see. Let me check the chat here. Llama Llama, yeah, that's a good one. Jester Jazz lost his jingle. Ah, I don't know that one. That sounds interesting. Let's see, Smart Cookie, Perseverance. Cool. Anybody else who could Ruby has a worry. I don't know that one. That sounds interesting. Anybody else could unmute and share? Tutor and rest by
I
RBT.
read a book, a little emotional, and it's about a boy who his toy got broken, his favorite toy of all time. And it kind of goes through how he started out scared because he couldn't find his toy and then worried, like, what if it didn't come back? And it has like different visuals for each emotion. And then he started getting angry, and then he lashed out at his sister, and then realized that his dad accidentally broke it. And then he goes through the guilt and the embarrassment, and then his sister shows him kindness, and they like little love can heal even though you're feeling angry. And so I like that because it went through all the different emotions, but it also showed like how you can really like you can make a mistake and lash out at your family or whatever, but also coming back and realizing like, ooh, I made a mistake, and that feeling that angst and being okay with it, and then your family member coming and helping, because we do a lot of family stuff in our classroom.
That's amazing. Thanks for sharing. That sounds really good. So one thing with resilience that I share is there's what we call a big so trauma, right? Like children and adults, we all go through different kinds of trauma. There's some trauma that's considered like the big T trauma, and that's when it's very severe. So any kind of abuse, neglect, all of that. And then there's other kinds of trauma that's considered like little T trauma. So those are we see that more often in the preschool classroom, right? Where they have some fears. There's things that occur in their real world that's not completely serious, but it is traumatic for them. And so that's something to consider. The other thing I'm going to challenge you today is to uh, try to understand there's going to be similarities, but differences between an SEL approach and a resilience-based approach. There's some similarities, but there's some big differences. And I think this is going to be good for you all because based on what I heard, you already have that SEL lens, which is really powerful. The resilience-based lens is also powerful, and it's a little bit different. It targets different factors. So let's get into those. Thank you for sharing, everyone. Oops, 1 second. Trying to forward. There we go. So resilience, there's a bunch of definitions out there in the world. Most of them come down to these two bullets: a capacity to adapt when faced with adversity. So there's always an adversity, something that's a challenge, right? Something that happens to us. And then what's our capacity to adapt to it? Doesn't necessarily mean that we always overcome, you know, and that's something important to remember. Is there sometimes there isn't solutions. Sometimes it's just you have to adapt and move forward. And then the other one is engaging in the process of restoring functionality. And so in the process of being resilient, we have to find equilibrium, you know? And so basically it's that there's not, you're not always going to be, the child is not always going to be victorious. They might still live in a neighborhood that's rough, right? And that's a challenge. That might be something they have to be resilient. There might be a situation and so forth. So this isn't a storybook, right? Where at the end the character's victorious and everything's okay. There's going to be many situations where it's not. However, second here, I'm trying to move this over. There are some factors that research tell us that are really important in the process of developing resilience. And so these are some of the factors here. And this is what differentiates SEL versus, oh, I just lost you. SEL versus resilience-based. And so the first one is obviously having close friends. That's important, right? Like all of us, whenever we go through something, or the children, we have to have some friends to talk to about it, to engage with and share what's happening. For the children, they need close relationships with adults. So the first one, they need little friends in the classroom. They need little friends outside of the classroom, but they also need close relationships with trusted adults. That's important. And some of you shared about the books that you enjoy, and that had a lot of them had to do with emotional regulation. And this is critical. Without being able to regulate one's emotions during a challenge, that can lead to severe consequences. Grab me 1 second because this, for some reason, added to my screen. Okay, sorry, I just lost you guys. And so, for example, in some of our classrooms, communities, neighborhoods, some of the young children of all ages, right, that get in big trouble. And one example would be teenagers, where they don't have emotional regulation, so they disrupt, or they cause severe damage and so forth. And what happens to them? A lot of them, especially in Black and brown communities, they'll end up in jail. They end up in bad places. Some of them end up dead. It's very serious. And so being able to be self-aware of our emotions and being able to regulate them, and having some skills to find that equilibrium, is life-saving advice for many communities. The other factor is problem-solving skills, and being able to solve problems. When a child or young adult, when they don't have emotional regulation skills, they might just blur out, right? Like they just might explode and so forth. And so you got to deal with the emotions, and then you have to solve problems. You see a problem in front of you, let's figure out different things we can do to try and solve it. The next one is motivation. This one's really important because for this one, and I worked in predominantly Black and brown communities all my life for 30 years. And in many instances, motivation has been stripped out of many children and young adults' lives. There was one study that came out a few years ago where they asked African American young men that were under 20, and they asked them, like, why do you carry a gun? And they said, well, I don't see myself living past 21, right? And so if you have this mindset of fear, and your amygdala is in fight mode all the time, there's no motivation. Like the motivation goes out the door. There might not be resources or opportunities for certain children, and the motivation goes out the door. And same thing with the next one, self-efficacy, which is the desire, right? The desire to get up and do it. And you see that often in certain children, certain communities, where why should I get up and do anything when we're pushed down, brought down, and so forth. And then the last factor is faith and hope. And this could be faith, in yourself, in God, in faith in the community, faith in something or someone that psychologically helps them be in a positive mindset, which is really important. And so I'm going to open it up to all of you to ask questions about this or some connections you might have made with these factors here.
Hello.
Yes.
Okay. My name is Lee Garner, and I agree totally with the points here that you mentioned. I retired from an alternative program, grade 6 through 12, and I also volunteered for working with children with abused children of Cook County, called CASA, Court Reporter, Court Appointed Special Advocate. And I agree with you wholly, because so many children, even in childcare, after I retired, I did a little of that for a while. They don't have faith in themselves, and some of them don't have faith in anybody else around them. They'll talk down. Some of them, I had one little boy, it wasn't because he couldn't talk, it was because of his environment and how he was treated. He would not look you in the eye, and the mom would say he can't talk. So I would just use different things in order to get his attention. He wouldn't even feed himself. He was 5 years old. He didn't have any special needs or anything like that. He wouldn't eat, if he ate anything, would probably be crackers or something like that. But I talked to him. I did one-on-one with him. And finally, he was able to look me in the eye, start smiling. I even gave him food. I would take the spoon and I would pretend I'm driving a car, and I'd lead it up to his mouth, and he'd look up, he'd smile, the kids would smile. Gradually, he started eating. He had to gain that faith in himself in order to do it. But he had gone through so much before 5 years old that he just didn't want to hold his head up. He didn't want to eat. He didn't want to do anything. And his mom would talk down to him. So we did have to report it. But like I said before, I agree with you wholeheartedly. It takes a lot when you see someone talking that way, or if you see, sometimes they won't say anything, but if you could just notice them, just be observant, especially when they're younger. Even so when they're older, but when they're younger and you see that, you can start like one-on-one. And that's what I did with him. He got to the point, he knew all of his letters. He even could read a little. He knew words. He was listening, but he wasn't saying anything. And see,
Absolutely.
and that could be a big problem, with kids, and eventually as they get older, if they aren't treated, if, the situation isn't treated, then they'll rebel. And then
Right.
you'll say something is wrong with them. And it's just the environment. And once he got out of that environment, which they took him from his mom, and his grandmother got custody of him, he was a total different person. So I agree with what you're saying. It matters a lot. We need to, in this day and time, we have so many kids that are on the spectrum. And sometimes, they'll just act that way and not necessarily on that spectrum. And that's because of their environment. But I agree with what you're saying wholeheartedly.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you for that story. I really appreciate it because you're right. A lot of these kids are super smart, but they have so much they're going through that they're not able to let that out. And yeah, basically, what you just mentioned is you started building a close relationship with him, and that allowed him to express himself and start showing how amazing he is, or they were. So thanks for sharing. I'm going to move on to, one second, please. Here we go. So I'm going to share with you one of my books. This one's called Jamal Learns to Be Resilient. So I wrote 4 storybooks for kids because like Lee was mentioning, I've been in the field for 30 years and I keep seeing this every decade. It's like a wicked cycle that you see some of the traumas that the kids experience, even the little ones, right? And sometimes kids are labeled the bad kids, um, and other negative labels. And sometimes it's just because, like Lee was saying, it's the environment, and we didn't know. Um, and so for this storybook that I'm about to share, I'd like you all to pinpoint what the adversity was, what Jamal's reactions were, how what kind of coping mechanism was there, and was there equilibrium? How was that found? So those 4 things. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second just so I can switch to the story. 1 second, please. Let's see, Jamal. There you go. All right, and then I'm going to pause it here and there just to ask a few questions. And if you could just share your perspective, that'd be great. Here we go.
Jamal Learns to Be Resilient by Alan Rosales, illustrated by Sergio Drummond. Jamal woke up feeling a bit scared. During the night, he heard loud noises in his neighborhood and didn't know what the commotion was about. He said to himself, "I hope my family and friends are safe." Jamal's grandmother had prepared him cheesy grits for breakfast, Jamal's favorite breakfast food. "Eat your food, Jamal, while it's nice and hot," she said. "Thank you, Mama." Jamal and his grandmother walked to school. "Mama, are we safe in our neighborhood?" She looked at Jamal with a concerned face and said, "Honey, we are safe as long as we stay together." She began to sing, "This little light of mine." Jamal smiled, bobbed his head, and then chimed in, "I'm gonna let it shine." They walked past the neighborhood playground. They walked past the local restaurant. They walked past the local laundromat. Then they arrived at school.
So I'm going to pause it there and just rewind a little bit. And what do you notice about Jamal's journey to school? So right from the get-go, what do you notice?
His grandma's walking with him. She's reassuring him of their safety.
Okay.
She's singing a song with him, which might help him later, like use as a way to cope when he's feeling scared.
Wonderful. Absolutely. Thank you. Anybody else?
It looks
Yeah,
like
I
he's in
was
a
gonna
city.
say something similar. Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. I was gonna say it looks like he's like in a city, like a city neighborhood. Very busy, a lot of things going on.
Yeah. What do you think is happening in this page here? What do you guys think might have happened at that moment?
Having a hard time see it. It's kind of tiny on my screen, but
Oh, I'm sorry.
no, that's okay.
And this is open to everyone, not just you, Jen.
Yeah.
I'm not sure your question because it says right there that he heard so much commotion at night, and so he was scared because he thought something happened to his family, and he's all worried because he heard something that didn't sound like it was like a good thing.
Got
And
it.
so his grandmother, rather than just, saying, oh, don't worry, or everything's fine, or this or that, she actually was in tune with his feelings and understood he needed extra
Absolutely.
reassurance and extra care and validation for his feelings and gave it to him.
It looked like the L fell off the track.
Yeah.
Yeah.
While also giving him like a coping mechanism.
Perfect. Thank you. Was it Angel that had a perspective you were going to share?
Oh yeah, I was just saying that she was teaching him kind of how to self-soothe in moments where he may feel himself becoming dysregulated. So singing the song to him and kind of like just being present with him in that moment, I think does a lot. And like everyone else said, like she wasn't dismissive of his feelings, like she still validated and acknowledged them. And I think that's really powerful in itself because sometimes when we are so quick to brush off those feelings of little ones, then it's almost like we're telling them it's wrong to have feelings and that they shouldn't lean into those emotions. But by embracing those emotions, like we're able to address them and help teach them like how to regulate their emotions and how to work through them.
Got it. Thank you, Angel. So I see in the chat, and I get this very often, like Ms. Letitia saying, he might have heard sirens or gunshots. I do get a lot of gunshots interpretations here and there. And also, when you see Jamal start walking to school, well, if you notice the environment, it's loving at home, right? Even though that you might have heard some dangerous commotion, which is typical in some areas. But then you start walking and you start seeing graffiti, you start seeing broken buildings, broken playgrounds. You know, in some of our areas, they're considered food deserts, right? Because there's no good food. All they have is corner stores with horrible fake food, fake drinks, fake food, chips. If you look at the store, and this is an actual picture, some of these photos are real. Like I just went around the neighborhood, took photos, and this one's a real one. And for young children, they might not know, they might not show it right away, but it's scary. I mean, if we were there, it's pretty scary. You don't know what's happening. There's there could be suspicious people here and there, maybe some gangs members, maybe some so all these different emotions that Jamal is experiencing just on the way to school. All right, let's continue. Let's see what happens here. Come on.
Jamal and his grandmother entered the classroom where he was greeted by his teacher, Mrs. Cruz. Good morning, Jamal. It's great to see you today. Say good morning to Mrs. Cruz, his grandmother told him. I don't want to, responded Jamal. Well, we have many fun activities for you today, stated Mrs. Cruz. Jamal grunted. Then he crossed his arms and walked to the circle time area. During story time, the children were busy talking loudly. Mrs. Cruz asked Jamal if he could describe the picture in the book. I don't want to, he said, then crossed his arms and walked away. After story time, the children went to draw pictures. In a loud voice, Jenny said, I'm going to draw a picture of my mommy and daddy. Are you going to draw a picture, Jamal? He responded, I don't want to. And he crossed his arms and walked away. Mrs. Cruz had prepared a puzzle for her and Jamal to play together. She called to him with a friendly, loud voice. Jamal, do you want to help me put this puzzle together? I don't want to, said Jamal. Then he crossed his arms and walked away. Jamal went to the library area where he sat on the beanbag chair and began to mumble. I don't want to play anything in this school. I should have stayed at home with Mama. Mrs. Cruz noticed that Jamal was by himself and that he looked troubled. She sat next to him and asked what was wrong. I don't want to be here, Jamal said. She looked intently at Jamal. Sometimes we have to learn to become resilient. That means we have to learn to communicate our emotions nicely and find solutions to the things that bother us. Jamal thought, resilient means to communicate my emotions nicely and find solutions to the things that bother me. He put on a brave face. I'm going to solve my problems. Jamal rushed to the writing area to grab his daily journal. He began to write and draw. He said as he drew, things that make me scared. He drew a picture of him walking to school with his grandmother. Walking past the playground is scary, he thought. He drew a second picture and said to himself, walking past the restaurant is scary. He drew a third picture and said, the kids being loud is scary. Jamal ran back to Mrs. Cruz and showed her the story he made about walking to school and being in the classroom. Mrs. Cruz, walking to school is scary, and the classroom is too loud for me. I don't feel safe. Mrs. Cruz's heart hurt for Jamal and all his fears. Oh, Jamal, I didn't know you felt scared coming to school. Feeling scared is something that every person goes through. I am so proud of you. It took such courage to share these feelings with me. She hugged Jamal tightly. Mrs. Cruz called a class meeting so that Jamal could share his story. He showed his drawings. I'm scared when I walk to school with my mama. Me too, said Alicia. I'm scared in the car, said Ian. The children began to share their stories of coming to school. Mrs. Cruz, Jamal said, can we sing the song my mama sings to me when I'm scared? Of course, she responded. Jamal began to sing. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. The children smiled and began to sing along with them. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Jamal's heart glowed as he felt safe and happy. Later that day, when Jamal's grandmother arrived at school, he rushed up to her. Mama, I'm not scared anymore. I sang the song you sing at choir with my friends, and my heart felt brave. Oh, Jamal, you are the best grandbaby a mama could have. They held hands gently and sang as they walked home. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. The end.
All right.
Jamal learns to
Uh-oh,
be
not
resilient.
again. All right, so let me give you a few seconds here just to think about the story and the 7 factors of resilience that we talked about. I intentionally added those 7 factors that that I shared earlier into this book and to the other 3 books because it's an opportunity for teachers to pause in different parts of the book and have conversations about resilience and motivation, emotional regulation, all of that. They're all in there. And so let me give you a few seconds to think about a specific part of the book where you saw something that you can use to have conversations with children to talk about resilience. All right. So we have some volunteers.
Could you ask the question again? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Oh, no problem. Just a part of the story that maybe you were interested in or you thought would be great to have a conversation about resilience.
Oh, okay.
I just like the way he the teacher used the morning meeting as a way, instead of just being like, oh, we'll talk about it later, or I'll like talking to him on the side, to have him bring it to the morning meeting so that he could see how other people felt and he could see that he wasn't alone, and just the empathy building with his peers. I thought that was really nice.
Thank you, Jamie. That makes total sense. Yep.
Angel has her hand raised.
Oh, Angel. Yeah. Just jump in.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know. Thank you for whoever just said that. But also just building off of what Jamie said, that empathy building and the fact that he was able to kind of share his own coping mechanism and how he knew what would make him feel better, how he was able to share that with other children who may not have a grandma or a mama in their life that will implement things like that. So I think on the part of him being resilient in his own right, but also wanting to not just keep his resilience to himself and what he's learned from his grandma to himself or his mom to himself, but to want to share that with other people, not knowing what they may be going through. And if they actually have that support or are aware, that maybe singing a song can help calm them down in moments where they might be distressed. So I think that's just said really big of him as singing it with everyone and then kind of having other people join in. And I think just sharing the wealth.
Absolutely. Thank you, Angel. Yeah.
I want to say, like, he was having difficulty wanting to participate, and it was like due to him and his emotions, like not being where he needed them to be in order for him to want to do things at school. And that's something like students can relate to when they don't feel like participating. And then we can like ask some deeper questions to figure out like why, and because like we know what they like to do, and if it's a day when they're not wanting to do things that they normally like to do, then that causes for more questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Brianna. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Oh, somebody else want to jump in? Okay. I appreciate that. One of the main purposes for me writing the four storybook series is because I noticed that many of the teachers I worked with weren't aware that children experience some children experience some sort of trauma just on the way to school. And so sometimes you'll have kids that act up. I'm sorry, if you can mute, if you'd like to share something, just jump in. Sometimes what the children experience just on the way to school messes with their central nervous system. The fear that they fear, the anxiety, all of those things are a big factor. And they're so young, they don't have the language. Some of them don't have the language or the vocabulary yet to be able to say, hey, this is scary, this is freaking me out or whatever. But so they'll explode or they'll avoid situations and so forth. And so that was one of the main purposes, is just to get the teachers to become more aware and to bring awareness of the 7 factors and so how those strategies can be used to support children's learning. So I'm going to move back to the PowerPoint. Grab me 1 second, please. Here we go. If you could please mute your computer unless you want to share something. Appreciate it.
Oh, so I just wanted to echo I was so impressed with the grandma and the teacher that they, yeah, didn't minimize his feelings, let him feel the things he did, and without coming out and saying, "Oh, it's always a safe neighbor," she recognized it, said, "Well, it can be safe as long as we're together." And a lot of times we're facing things that, or our children are, our students are, that don't feel safe, but there's a strength and resilience. So I love the grandmother's approach, and the teachers too. We all know it's hard when a child doesn't want to do what the rest of the class is doing, and we worry about it kind of disrupting things or setting example for others. But the teacher was resilient enough herself that she recognized he needed some time, and even when he didn't want to do the puzzle that she'd set aside for him, she let him um had let him calm down in the way he needed to and share in the way he could. And I love to, and that's a song that I grew up with too, but I know in the public school sometimes we're concerned about, well, I might not be able to share this or that song because it might represent too much of my background, and that might not feel acceptable in a public school. But I love the fact that he felt empowered to share the song, and the teacher was okay with his sharing the song because he wasn't necessarily trying to convince other people of what he believed, but he was sharing something that was special to him and helped him feel brave. So I thought it was very powerful story of resilience for parents and teachers and students. So thank you for sharing that book.
Oh, thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing. You're right. I mean, having teachers that are compassionate, right, and have empathy. Sometimes you have teachers that are very teacher directed, and you feel a certain way. Well, deal with it. We got to move on. We got these lessons to get through, right? And so you're right. Having somebody that's able to recognize that and allowing them to vent or allowing them to regulate is so important.
I
And so
think it
here's
takes administrations that are supportive too. We've probably all been at some point in some place where someone walks in the room and expects every child to be doing, attending the same way at the same time. And if someone isn't, it's seen as a reflection on us rather than the fact that maybe we're being a resilient teacher and doing what a child needs at the time of giving some grace and space.
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. So the first strategy I provided for you all, and it goes with what you just said, Marcia, is it's just the 7 factors. And so one strategy that I have teachers implement is use this document anytime you go and you buy some books. We all have to buy storybooks for the classroom. And so it's important to have different kinds of storybooks, right? Some that are for SEL, some that are for math, for science, and so forth. You should also have a nice collection of resilience-based storybooks. And one way to evaluate is, does this story, can I apply the 7 factors of resilience here, right? Is this a good book? Is this a good fit for me to come and have these conversations with the kids? And so let's say everybody knows the storybook Goldilocks and the Three Bears, right? Like that's a classic from a long time ago, but it's always it's just a classic. We might look at that story depending on the version that you have. And is there an opportunity to talk about emotions there? Well, yeah, you see the baby bear, right? He's frustrated, the dad's angry, the mama's okay, that's one opportunity. Is there an opportunity to problem solve? Sure, right? If somebody, let's say Brianna, right? Sorry, I caught you yawning. If somebody, Lord forbid, but if somebody broke into a house nearby, what would you do to make it safer? Like, what would you do, Brianna, to make your
I
house or
would get more locks,
yeah,
secure my house,
absolutely.
and security cameras, like the Ring camera or
Yes,
something.
you got it. And so that's problem solving, right? It's the same thing. Goldilocks seems to be this sweet young girl, but actually she's a burglar. She breaks into a home and just trashes the home everywhere. and has no respect for it, right? And so you can ask the kids, what can we do to make this house safe? And they'll come up with all these answers. So there's an opportunity for problem solving there, motivation. So you see how that works, right? When you're about to purchase some books or acquire some books, is it a good fit to have a conversation about these 7 factors? And that's what differentiates this from an SEL. SEL has more to do with it also has to do with emotions and solving problems, conflict resolutions and things like that, but it doesn't have all these factors. And let's see. The other thing that's good about this strategy here, or just using this sheet, eventually we want to use this everywhere. So just like we have SEL opportunities, you might have an emotions chart. So when the children walk into the classroom, the first thing they do is they identify their emotions, right? That could be something there. You can provide opportunities to have conversations about emotions and problem solving and motivations everywhere, in the housekeeping area, in the water table, when they're drawing. If the teacher is intentional about it and she has these factors in mind, then you're able to apply them at will. And that's when you have a resilience-based culture in the classroom. And that's at its most powerful approach, is when it's just part of what the teachers do there. That's part of their culture. This is a resilience-based culture that we have here. So we have many conversations during mealtime, during everywhere, about these 7 factors. And it doesn't have to be all the factors at once. It could be, on Monday, hey, we're going to talk about motivation, why that's important, because that it's important to have motivation and desire to move on and do great things in life, and to do great things with your friends and your family, and there's hope out there, right? Let's find some resources that'll help you problem solve some situations. Okay, we move on to the lesson planner. This is one of my favorite documents that I use. And, I was in the classroom a long time ago, and I've worked with teachers for 30 years. And I know that teachers are so busy that they love when I used to create 1-pagers, because they don't have time for more. Like, I don't have time for a 5-page lesson plan, Alan. And I'm like, you're right. Let me do a 1-pager. And so I created this lesson planner that is just 1 page, because teachers will be like, oh, yeah, I could do 1 page. Yeah. And so with this, what happens here is it's a way to provide an intentional and instructional read aloud. So as teachers, we usually have multiple read alouds during the day, right? Some teachers read 3 times a day, 4 or 5 times a day, different times. It could be during circle time, before or after breakfast, before or after lunch, before or after snack time. There's a different, depends on the teacher's preferences. However, some of them should be recreational, right? For fun, just for the love of reading. But there should be at least 1 read aloud during the day that's instructional. And what that means is what's in front of you here, is that there are concepts that you're going to be targeting. There's objectives, content and language objectives. There's specific key vocabulary words that you're going to be using the whole week. You could choose. I always love to tell teachers, what are your top 5 vocabulary words for the week, right? Because the more the children hear them at the water table, during read alouds, during nap time, that's how they acquire a rich vocabulary base, right? And so what are your top 5 for this? And how do these top 5 help the children learn the concepts that you're trying to promote? And so with this lesson plan, you all should have a blank one. You write down the book, the relevant concepts that you want to focus on, the content objectives and language objectives. So content objective is Bloom's taxonomy, it's thinking verbs. So it has to do with thinking. So here it says children will identify and analyze. Those two are action verbs meant that tell us the kind of thinking the children are going to do during this read aloud. And then the language objective is important too. That has to do with reading, writing, listening, and speaking. So how are you going to get children to talk or listen or read something or write something? In this case, it's speaking because they're explaining. And you come up with your top 5 vocabulary words. And those, they're not random vocabulary words. They're the vocabulary words that children need to make sense of the concept that you're introducing. Okay, so keep that in mind. That's really important. They're not random words. They're specific words that children can use to describe the concepts that they're going through. And then I tell teachers, write down your higher order thinking questions. I did a lot of research with teachers where we recorded, we videotaped them playing in the block area for 10 minutes with a child, reading to children for 10 minutes. And then we transcribed what they said, all the questions that they asked. And then the teachers coded their questions. So basically, there were some instances where teachers were asking 50, 40, 50, 60 questions in 10 minutes, right? And you would think, awesome, like they're asking all these questions. And then when we coded the questions along with the teacher, they were all closed-ended questions. They were all memory-based questions. There weren't any higher order thinking questions. There weren't any critically thinking questions. And so that helped the teachers to self-analyze and self-transform their own practices by having them see the kinds of questions. And we're going to do more inquiry-based strategies later on. The next time we meet for the series 2, we're going to hone in on some methods that I use to help teachers develop their inquiry skills with children. And then finally, once you write down the kinds of questions, so like here it says, how did Jamal feel on the way to school? What made Jamal feel sad? How would you help Jamal? What would you do if you it were things that scared you, right? Like all these are open-ended, problem-based, some of them are problem-posed questions. And then the last part is when it's an instructional read aloud, you want to have activities or processes that happen before, during, and after the read aloud. Before, during, and after the read aloud. And so before, before, you can have a picture walk, that's a simple one where you just show the book. For example, I have Alicia learns to be resilient here. And you don't read the book to the children, you just show the pictures. You show the illustrations, right? And you go one by one and you just show the whole book. And what that does is it builds background knowledge, right? Even though you didn't read the book, the children are seeing the illustrations. They're starting to make sense of things. They're starting to see the environments. They're starting to see the people, the kind of people that are in there. And it just builds background knowledge, which is really good. So then once you read it, now they have something to connect with. You can ask questions before you read a book, right? Like the 4 books that I wrote, they're all named the same. Like this was Alicia Learns to be Resilient, Ian Learns to be Resilient, and Jorge Learns to be Resilient. And they're all 4 children are in the same classroom, which is kind of cool. So when you read the books, the kids are in there. So they're like real stories, but they're all headed to school, and they all experience different fears, right? And so you might ask questions before you read a book, like, hey, how did you come to school? Did you notice anything strange? Was there anything that made you happy? Was there anything that made you scared? So forth, right? Just as a way to build background knowledge. So when you read the book, they can make connections to that. And then you have the during part where you ask your hot questions. You can ask questions about children's real world. And then at the end of the book, you can ask them to retell. You can ask more questions. You can have them draw pictures and so forth. So I'm going to open it up for questions about this lesson planner. And what I tell teachers is, this lesson planner can build your capacity to engage children at a deep level. And so eventually, the different processes that you see in this lesson planner is what we should become naturally, right? And so what I tell teachers is, what would be great is that you do this naturally, organically. You just, as soon as you see a book, you're able to, in your mind, you have this framework in your mind. You see a book, whatever book it is, and you can quickly just come up with vocabulary words and deep questions and go through this process that eventually you won't even need the document because it's just who you are. This is the way you teach. This is the way you implement. Okay, I'll be quiet now.
I think that is a great document because it isn't natural and it's hard, right? In the moment to come up with those. I mean, I know when I'm reading stories, and I know that I need to ask higher order questions and I want the kids to, go back and forth with me. So I think this is really important and it's a good tool, even if you focus on one part at a time, you know what I mean? Like really trying to get those questions going. So yeah, I like this. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. Anyone else have comments or questions? The other thing to keep in mind is that this tool can be used for anything in the classroom. It could be, so there it says a read aloud lesson. Okay, change that out, a math lesson, change it out, a science lesson, change it out, an SEL lesson, right? So just to have a lesson, whether it's any topic, right? It should be the same process. And that turns the lesson into a high quality instructional opportunity for children. And so I use this for math, I use it for science, for SEL, obviously for resilience-based teaching. And eventually it's just, this is who I am, this is naturally. All right. Okay, so this is another gem. And I love this, but I have a bias because I created it, right? So of course. But I love this. This is something I did 20 years ago, actually. And everything else felt was developed based off of this because I used to love literacy and implementing literacy in the classroom. And so storytizing is the process of engaging children in in-depth, ongoing in-depth and high quality literature, right? And so there's 3 sections to this. The first one is about character development. Second one is setting development. And the third one is plot development. And so characters have to do with personality, physical features, feelings, emotions. The setting is all about the environment, right? And the climate, the atmosphere, time. And plot is sequence of events, cause and effect, problem, solution. And so before I talk about these 3, which one do you think is used more often in the classroom? And why? Which one do you think is used more often in the classroom?
I would say maybe the plot development, just because I feel like when we do stories, we're always kind of leading up to like, hey, this is the beginning, this is the middle, like, who's the antagonist or, who's the bad guy in the book and things like that. We kind of lean into that sequence of events and things happening kind of in this order, so to speak. So I think we kind of lean into more of the plot development, where we look into all the key aspects of what's the problem or what's the issue, we're going to solve it, things like that.
Okay, Angel, you get a shooting star. Because it's true. And one of the reasons why we focus on sequence of events is because most of us use a famous assessment tool that we have to incorporate in preschool, right? 0 to 5. I'm not gonna name the the company, but in one of the objectives, it states, can the children retell the story? Yeah. And so we have thousands of teachers across the nation asking children, what happened in the story? What happened first? What happened second? What happened third? And then they check that off on their assessment tool and they move on, right?
Alan, can I interject, please?
Of course.
There's also another one, the objective is sequence, teaching them sequence.
Yeah.
But I teach, I don't know if it's correct or not, but I actually start in the order that you have them. In the beginning, I do a lot of character development elements because I'm trying to teach social emotional. I'm trying to teach how people can be different, act different, look different, but we all are beautiful, and also about feelings, about acceptance, self-love. And then I start teaching them about characters, settings, things like that. And then I go into, okay, so what happens first? What happened in the middle? So I build them up a little bit at a time.
Good. That's wonderful. Excellent. Yep.
I would agree with Veronica. I think a lot with the population that I work with, we do a lot of character development first. Because they can relate to it and it's more tangible than and sometimes the settings and the plot is too abstract and too over their head that it's a disconnect. So we kind of focus on like, how does this person's face look? Like, look at their face. What are they doing? How do you feel that way? And stuff like that, because it's more tangible for them.
Awesome. Yeah. I love that. Good for you. Anyone else want to share? Okay, great. And so what I share with teachers is you can read one book for weeks, literally. And it doesn't mean that you have to read the whole book every time, right? You can read, one of these books. You can read any other books that are in your classroom. You can focus on a couple pages at one time because you're honing in on one of these sections, right? One of these elements. Maybe today, if we're reading Goldilocks and Three Bears or Three Billy Goats Gruff, I really love that book. We're just gonna focus in on the little goat, right? What he experienced, and those were like 2-3 pages, and we go deep in there. You don't always have to read the whole book. That's called chunking, where you chunk parts of the book. And you know what? After breakfast, we're gonna chunk the book, and we're just gonna read a couple, and then before lunch, we're gonna find out something else, right? And so that's another learning opportunity for children. And it also helps because children do have short attention spans. And sometimes you see teachers, I've seen some teachers do some 45-minute circle times, 30 minutes, even 20 minutes is pretty long. Short and sweet, I always tell teachers, videotape your circle times so you can capture children's attention spans. Because as you're reading, you're not paying attention to that, right? But if you videotape yourself, then you're able to capture children's attention spans and their interests and so forth. Coming back to the storytelling framework, you want to take your time, and it doesn't mean that you have to start with character development. It's up to you. You can start anywhere you want. However, when you have conversations with children about the characters' personalities, right? Are they shy? Are they brave? Are they strong? Are they mean? When you talk about their physical features, when you talk about the kinds of ideas that the characters had and their feelings and emotions, like some of the teachers that just spoke up, that builds the heart connection. You start building a connection with the character. You start feeling like, how many of you know the Three Billy Goats Gruff, right? We all read the Three Billy Goats Gruff. Don't you feel bad for the troll? That poor troll lives under a bridge with some some bad clothes and no shoes and terrible teeth, and he's never had a haircut, right? And so you start connecting to the heart. And so we need multiple opportunities for children to connect to with the characters of the book. And then we need more time to make sense of the environment, right? It's not enough to say, oh yeah, he's in a city or it's in a, well, let's take a look at the illustrations. Let's take a look at the location. Is it they're living things, not living things? It is in a forest, are there animals? What's the climate like? Is it scary? You know, is it dark? Is it cold? And then the third one is the plot development, and not just focusing on sequence of events or cause and effect, but problem solving. Like what problem solving opportunities are there? What kind of questions can I ask to get children to think critically about the problem? Every story has a problem. That's why it's a story. So let's figure out how you would solve the problem, or let's get most of our students' perspectives on how they would solve the problem. And so what happens when you spread this out over time, and this is something that's missing in some of our schools, when they get to grammar schools, children can't connect with the heart, with the eyes, and the brain. Because the heart, right, it's like this deep feeling towards the characters. The eyes, it's important that the children see themselves inside the environment of the storybook that they're reading, because it helps them make a deeper connection and more understanding of the experience of the character. And then you have the brain, where you have to have really good questions. You need those high order thinking questions that the teacher's been providing over time throughout the whole school year, right? And so when the teachers are able to provide heart, eyes, and brain connections, they become better readers. Once they start reading, they can make these big connections, and they have the resources to make sense of the books that the teachers are reading in kindergarten, in first grade, in second grade, in third grade, and so forth. And many times you just have children that learn how to read formally, but they can't understand, right? They can't read to understand, so they fail. And so this tool here is something you can share for yourself, for your teachers, for your team, just to say, hey, let's use the other tool that Alan gave us, right? That'll make us think about the kinds of books we're buying, and then let's make sure that we're having opportunities for children to develop the heart connection, the eyes connection, and the brain connection to the books that we're reading. Okay, I'll open it up, see what comments and questions you might have. And we have 15 more minutes, so. Any other questions or comments about this tool? Just feel free to jump in, Marcy. I see your hand up there.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's one of the many things I love about preschool. I've also taught elementary and middle school age, and I enjoy them all in different ways. But one thing I really love is that seems to me that there is slightly less pressure depending on the setting to rush quite so quickly to the retelling and quite so quickly to the beginning, middle, and not that it isn't still important, but I think the pressure is really on in elementary school and so much almost like standardized testing on the computer, even in kindergarten, that I think we're blessed to be in preschool and still the SEL is often such a major component, depending on the program, that I think it gives us a little more freedom to focus on those connections that are so important at any age. What I've seen sometimes, even in my own children, I have older children now, and that sometimes some years in some settings and some kind of focus on test scores, I felt like there was such a kind of push with the retelling and the beginning, middle, and end, and even the the plot diagram and the story map and things that are still helpful and important, but that I felt like they kind of sometimes lost a little bit of the skill of making connections, and then when they needed to do that again in middle school and high school, sometimes they were just a little rusty, and we would do it at home, so we saw movies and discussed books. But I think it's so important that students still be able to do that, and that as important as it is to understand, the plot, that the more important thing is our understanding of the story. I think that's a real danger with the big heavy push with phonics as well, that students can be so into, and teachers sometimes, administration so into decoding, that we forget that it's all about meaning. And it's important to know, be able to have sounds as a tool, but if we're missing out on reading is meaning making, not just decoding, then we've kind of lost something in the package. And I think that's hopefully the beauty of preschool that we bring with us, is that we're some of those things we have a tiny bit less pressure depending on the year in the program in the school and the administration. And I hope that we don't lose it. I think that's something that we hopefully can continue to share with those who are facing more pressure with older students.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, that makes sense. I think, unfortunately, I don't know how much I can say here, but yeah, just retelling is a easy skill to check off, especially for big assessment tools. But the rest, it's not easy, right? Like you would need to build a separate assessment tool just for reading for understanding, right? To be able to capture all these processes that are happening. And so I think that this is my opinion, that art form was lost some decades ago, when the skill-based instruction assessment piece came into place, which is still really important, like you said. But I think it's a disservice to children if all we do is sequence of events and those basic skills. So that's my opinion. Anybody else have something to say about this tool? For those that are directors, you can use these for great conversations with your teams. If you're a teacher, this would be a nice tool to use with your classroom team, or your teams of classrooms in your schools. I know sometimes there's multiple classrooms that come together and have conversations. Okay. That's fine. We have 10 minutes. All right. So I'm going to share another read aloud and see if we can capture some of the resilience factors that we've been talking about. Give me 1 second. I guess I have to switch this out. All right. So this one's called George. Learns to be resilient. And same thing, see where you can find opportunities in the illustrations to have conversations with the children about the 7 factors of resilience, just to help them develop that those skills.
Jorge Learns to be Resilient by Alan Rosales, illustrated by Sergio Drummond. Buenos días, Jorge. Buenos días, Sammy. It's time for la escuela, Jorge's mother said as she woke him and his little brother. Apúrate, hurry, or we're going to be late. Jorge looked grouchy and said, No quiero, I'm tired. I don't want to go to la escuela. Me either, said Sammy. I have to go to la factoría, so please get dressed. If you hurry, we can buy some tamales from Mrs. Ortega. She makes los mejores tamales in the city. Sí, those tamales, said Jorge. Me too, replied Sammy. On their way to school, Jorge, Sammy, and their mother stopped by Miss Ortega's tamal stand. 6 tamales, por favor, requested Jorge. 2 for me, 2 for Sammy, and 2 for Mamita. Muy bien, said Mrs. Ortega. She gave them 6 tamales that were received with joy. The 3 of them began to eat the tamales and continued on their journey. They walked past the panaderia. They walked past the train station. Then they arrived at school.
Okay, so this, does anybody recognize this area of the city? Let's see if we have any Southsiders here. So this is actually by the 26th Street jail. And so Cook County Jail there. So that's in the background there. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I see like carts, like more like carts and things, and people selling things around where I work. So
Oh really?
yeah. So yeah.
Yes. Thank you. And then here's a big, and these are real pictures. Like these are real photos that I took. This is one of a bakery and a train station. That's an actual photo. Okay.
Jorge entered the classroom, where he was greeted by his teacher, Mrs. Cruz. Buenos días, Jorge. I'm so happy to see you. Ándale, say good morning to your teacher, his mother told him. With lots of joy, he said, Buenos días, Miss Cruz. This tamal is for you. They are bien ricos. Mrs. Cruz was so surprised. Gracias, Jorge. That is kind of you, she said. De nada, responded Jorge. He turned around and said, Adios, mamita. Adios, little brother. Then he went to get ready for story time. During story time, the teacher read a book about tall buildings. She asked Jorge if he knew of a tall building. My casa is tall, he said. The other children began to laugh at Jorge. Someone mumbled, Did he say my casa? My casa? That's a funny word. Jorge felt embarrassed and remained quiet for the rest of the story time. After story time, some of the children went to paint pictures of buildings. Jenny asked Jorge, What are you painting, Jorge? He responded, This is my casa, Sammy, my little brother, and my mamita. You sure sound funny, Jenny said. You need to learn to talk like us. English. Jorge's face dropped with shame. He walked away with his hands covering his face. Mrs. Cruz had prepared wooden blocks for the children to build tall buildings. Jorge joined a small group and began to stack the blocks. My casa is tall, he said. And the other children began to laugh at him. One of the children said, He said my casa again. He sounds so funny. Jorge felt very sad and walked away. Jorge went to the library area, where he sat down on the beanbag chair and began to murmur, I'm not funny. I don't sound funny. Yo hablo español. I want mi mamita. Mrs. Cruz noticed that Jorge was by himself and that he looked troubled. She sat next to him and asked what was wrong. ¿Qué pasa, Jorge? The kids don't like me, he said. They say I sound funny, and I don't know English because I say my casa. I feel dumb. She looked intently at Jorge. Tenemos que ser resilientes. We have to learn to become resilient, she said. That means we have to learn to communicate our emotions nicely and find solutions to the things that bother us. Jorge thought to himself, resiliente means to communicate my emotions nicely and find solutions to the things that bother me. He found courage and said, I'm going to solve mis problemas. Jorge rushed to the drawing area to grab some paper and markers. He said, I am not funny. I am smart. He drew a picture of himself walking to school and buying tamales. I am smart. I buy tamales. He drew a second picture and said, I am smart. I listen to mi maestra read books. He drew a third picture and said, I am smart. I paint pictures of tall buildings like my casa and Sammy and Mamita. Jorge ran back to Mrs. Cruz and showed her the drawings he made about being smart and communicating with others. Mrs. Cruz, the kids say I'm funny. I say I am smart and happy, he said. Look! Mrs. Cruz was excited and concerned at the same time. She said, Oh, Jorge, I didn't know you felt shame about speaking Spanish. No one should feel shame when they are learning a new language. I am so proud of you. It took such courage to communicate your ideas and feelings with me. She hugged Jorge firmly. Mrs. Cruz called a group meeting so that Jorge could share his drawings. He held up his drawings and said, I am not funny, and I don't sound funny. I speak Español and English. I am smart. I speak English and Español too, said Maria. I speak English and Francois, said Emily. The children began to talk about the different languages they spoke. Suddenly, Jenny felt left out. She walked over to Mrs. Cruz and said, I want to learn Spanish too. That's a great idea, said Mrs. Cruz. She looked at the children. Who else wants to learn Spanish? With excitement, the children raised their hands and said, Me, me, me. Jorge looked at the children. His heart took courage and he began to sing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. He said, "Sing with me, my friends." All the children sang together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Jenny was so excited and said, "We did it! We sang in Spanish!" Jorge felt proud of helping his friends and said, "Ahora you can sing in español." Later that day, Jorge's mother came to pick him up from school. "How was your day, mijo?" He responded, "Yo soy resiliente, mami. I was sad, but then I taught mis amigos how to count to 15 in español. Now my friends like me because I speak español." She answered, "That sounds wonderful, mijo, and I'm very proud of you. Esto merece premio." Jorge and Sammy were excited for the reward because they decided to get some paletas.
All right. So this one is part of the series, and we only have a couple minutes. Any questions, comments about the storybook or about today's presentation in general that you would like to share?
I know in my class, we have a bilingual section, but we also have several kids that don't speak Spanish in our program, and I have the students who don't speak Spanish. So right now I have a Spanish speaker, a child who spoke a dialect of Filipino, Nigerian, Gujarati. So I have a lot of languages in my classroom. And so especially when they first started, they were just fluent in their home language. So getting the other students to realize like they speak a different language than us, like, and I have lots of kids that use communication devices as well. So like being able to blend all of those communications and like helping kids feel like they aren't left out and that their communication style is unique and special and that they can share that with other people has been kind of a fun learning curve in my classroom because I haven't had that before. So this book really hits home because it's happening in my classroom.
Thanks for sharing that. That's an interesting setup there. So an ESL approach would help out there for sure. So I feel for you. It's great that you're able to teach them that acquiring a second language is positive, right? Not negative. So that's good. Others? Questions, comments about the presentation? The next time we meet, we're going to hone in on asking higher order thinking questions. There's some tools that you have in place. I'm going to share with you the little research I created with a lot of teachers and how you can use those tools to develop your inquiry based approach and also to support your community on enhancing the inquiry-based learning for children so that you can deal with whether it's with literacy or with anywhere in the classroom. So I appreciate you all being here and I hope you enjoyed the content and I hope to see you the next time.